A major blow to transgender rights. The Supreme Court has upheld a Tennessee ban on gender transition care for minors. The ruling will likely have a broad impact on 24 other states who have enacted similar bans.
The law bars gender transition surgery, puberty blockers, and hormone therapy. However, the ruling does not affect states that do not have bans. Vice President J.D. Vance actually took to Blue Sky for the first time to write about the ruling, saying, quote, "I found Justice Thomas's concurrence on medical care for transgender youth quite illuminating. He argues that many of our so-called experts have used bad arguments and substandard science to push experimental therapies on our youth."
Vance was quickly suspended from the platform, but his account was later restored. Meanwhile, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer sounded off on the ruling, writing, "Republicans' cruel crusade against trans kids is all an attempt to divert attention from ripping healthcare away from millions of Americans. We'll keep fighting and we'll keep marching on."
Right, so this ruling says states that want to prohibit these kinds of treatments for minors can do that. It seems obvious. I mean, I am a libertarian, so I am generally fine with preventing the government from limiting what people choose to do with their own bodies. Now we're talking about minors, and we generally have a broad consensus that government can set rules for what's okay for minors that abrogate their rights or their family's rights. We don't let minors drive cars or vote or in some cases like get tattoos without their parental permission or sex at various levels. There's all kinds of behavior that is said you're not an adult yet, you can't consent to it. These kinds of treatments, I would say, are the medical necessity of and how helpful they are is still being robustly debated and explored. If you look at European science authorities who have explored this question and looked at the evidence, there is not a lot of really compelling data to suggest a lot of great outcomes. Now, there's not a lot of cases overall, so I think we're still figuring out what is the best way to handle underage people who experience gender dysphoria. That is still being worked out. I don't think it is crazy to prohibit it, and if you grant that the state can have some power over what is appropriate for minors, I don't see how you could reach a conclusion other than it is all right for states to do this, and other states cannot do that, and then we'll see what's a better policy. That's just kind of how we arrive at good policy.
Sure. The Supreme Court ruling was getting into a quite complicated distinctions of law, but to get at your point about the research into this, there is a very heated debate about that because a lot of people say, look, gender-affirming care to people in adolescence does in fact reduce suicide risks, improves mental health outcomes, and so on and so forth. Others argue that some of these treatments, are they irreversible, and so do people, as it were, change their mind and come to regret them? But you're right. I mean, there is also a real debate about whether the treatment itself is effective. John Roberts, in his ruling, quoted a study from my beloved National Health Service in Britain, which found that the evidence to support the use of puberty blockers and hormones was, and this is the quote from the NHS study, remarkably weak, and that there was, quote, no good evidence that it did in fact work. Now, obviously, advocates for the trans community vigorously contest that and say that it does. All I'll say is there's a very heated debate about it. Then you come to what the Supreme Court was ruling on, which was interesting because the argument was not exactly trans people are being discriminated against. It was arguing that it was violating gender-based, the equal protection clause as it pertains to gender. And the argument was someone who was born female could use puberty blockers or hormone treatment for other reasons in a way that someone born male who wanted to appear more female could not. Right. And therefore it was discrimination on the base of gender.
It seems like a very creative argument to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a struggle, I think.
Well, especially when it's just, well, that's what the law is.
Right.
I mean, you got to go to your state. I mean, again, if you believe that there should be laws and restrictions on what people should do, then you have to make that case to your legislator, your state legislator, and get a different law that says that would change what the exceptions are. But they structured the law in such a way they are trying to prohibit this treatment from people who are biologically born male to receive treatment to become female, or other ways around, because of the dubious nature of the scientific research thus far. They are not citing dubious research about if you're born female to take treatments to make you more be able to fully express that, for if you have some kind of gender defect. That's fine. Again, that's just how these states decided to do it, and if you concede that it is proper for the government to put any kind of limitations on what underage people are able to do, I don't see how you can say that's not permissible. Right,
and Roberts' argument, which was a 6-3 majority verdict, was that because the Tennessee law applies to what certain drugs can be medically used for, and on the basis of age, it is not discrimination that runs afoul of equal protection, because it's saying, look, these drugs, you can't have those for minors for this particular purpose. But if someone has a congenital defect, or there's a very early puberty, you can use them for that reason, but not because someone is uneasy in their gender identity.
I think the greater harm that we are trying to prevent would be, I once saw research suggesting that the vast majority of people who expressed some kind of gender dysphoria in their adolescent time period, they end up not receiving any treatment for it. And the vast majority of them desist in feeling not aligned with their birth gender. So if all of them now some people don't, and treatment would be good for them. I think this treatment would be good for some people. But if everybody just at the drop of a hat was able to seek some kind of treatment when they're underage, given that most of them will recover from this mental condition without any kind of intervention, you'd be worried you'd be having a lot of unnecessary interventions that would lead to people having regretted doing it later in life. And that's what we're trying to prevent.
Right, and rates of gender dysphoria have absolutely gone exponentially higher. And it's like, if it's a medical or mental health condition, why is that happening?
Raising the possibility of a kind of social contagion sort of thing. Yeah. Pete Hegseth facing the heat in a Senate grilling. We'll fill you in on that coming up next.